They say no dynasty truly dies with a sword, it dies at a table. The House of Villeroy had ruled for generations, its name whispered in the candlelit courts of Europe as one of splendor and cruelty alike. Yet one winter evening, under the glow of chandeliers and silver goblets, every last heir, guest, and servant of that family drew their final breath before dawn. A feast meant to celebrate loyalty became a massacre, one that no blade could have wrought, only a mind. Welcome to the poisoned banquet that wiped out an entire noble house overnight, a story of envy, ambition, and silent revenge that spread through the veins of power like venom in a chalice. If history and human tragedy haunt you as much as they fascinate you, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay until the end. What you'll hear tonight is not just the fall of a family, but a lesson whispered across centuries. The first snow arrived early that year, settling over the Villeroy estate like a crown of frost. From a distance, the palace looked eternal, of marble towers rising through silver mist, banners catching the pale light of morning. But inside those shining walls, the air was thick with unease. The House of Villeroy had reigned for nearly 2 centuries, yet beneath the laughter and luxury, a quiet decay had begun to spread, the kind that eats through marble long before it cracks. Duke Armand Villeroy stood at his balcony, his reflection ghosting in the window. Age had crept into his eyes, though his pride remained untouched. He had built alliances through fear, not friendship, and the men who once toasted his victories now whispered of his downfall. His sons quarreled over inheritance, his council plotted with foreign lords, and the Duke, arrogant, calculating, decided to silence doubt in the only way he knew, spectacle. A grand banquet was announced, the likes of which no noble in France had seen in a generation. The kitchens burned day and night, the air filled with the smell of roasting boar and honeyed wine. Merchants arrived from the ports, their wagons heavy with saffron, cinnamon, and sugar. Tailors stitched through the night to prepare silks fine enough for royalty. The Duke wanted the world to see his strength, one last dazzling display before time or treachery could touch him. Duchess Ilara Villeroy watched all of this from the shadows of the corridor. Young, poised, and hauntingly beautiful, she carried the grace of a woman who had learned early how little power beauty truly gave. To the servants, she was kind but distant. To her husband, she was both trophy and threat. Few noticed her disappear late at night to her private study, where the faint scent of ink and almonds lingered. Among the hundreds of servants preparing for the feast was Lucien, a 17-year-old attendant with eyes too observant for his station. The Duke had taken him under his wing after catching him reading stolen letters, impressed rather than angered. Since then, Lucien had become the quiet witness to every hidden truth in the palace, the Duke's temper, the Duchess's secret visitors, and the barrels of exotic wine that arrived sealed in wax stamped not with the Villeroy crest, but a serpent. The day before the banquet, the snow thickened. Lucien oversaw the wine delivery, shivering as he worked. When he lifted one of the casks, a faint almond scent clung to his gloves. He frowned, but said nothing. Servants who asked too many questions didn't last long in the Duke's service. That evening, Duke Armand rehearsed his toast before the mirror, his voice rich with self-satisfaction. "They'll remember this night for centuries," he murmured. Duchess Ilara entered silently behind him, her reflection meeting his in the glass. "Oh, they will," she said softly. "I promise you that." By nightfall, the valley shimmered with torchlight as carriages arrived one after another, their passengers cloaked in velvet and pride. The Duke greeted them at the grand staircase, his smile polished, his words dripping with charm. He looked every inch the ruler he believed himself to be. Inside, the banquet hall blazed with gold. Musicians played beneath crystal chandeliers, servants glided between tables with trays of pheasant, oysters, and candied fruit. Laughter echoed through the marble chamber like a challenge to fate itself. Yet beneath the glittering chaos, Lucien felt a current of dread. He had been near the cellars again that morning, the smell of almonds stronger than before. From her seat beside the Duke, Duchess Ilara appeared the perfect hostess, poised, radiant, untouchable. She lifted her goblet, the candlelight catching on her jewels, and smiled at her husband as though nothing in the world could harm them. When the Duke rose to give his toast, silence fell across the hall. "Tonight," he proclaimed, "the House of Villeroy stands eternal." Glasses clinked, cheers erupted, and wine flowed like blood through the veins of the feast. Lucien watched him drink first. The Duke's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Ilara's smile did not waver. Moments later, thunder cracked outside. A candle flickered out. Somewhere down the table, a cough broke the laughter. Then another. The music faltered. A noblewoman slumped forward, her pearls scattering like tears across the floor. The Duke's goblet fell, crimson spilling across the white tablecloth. Lucien froze, the bitter scent flooding his lungs. Around him, panic spread like fire. And as the Duchess rose from her chair, calm, silent, eyes glinting in the candlelight, Lucien understood too late the feast had never been a celebration. It was an execution. The storm outside raged through the night, but nothing could drown the horror inside the Villeroy Palace. The once majestic banquet hall now lay in ruin, tables overturned, silk gowns soaked in wine, chandeliers swaying from the tremors of panic. The air was thick with the scent of death and almonds, the perfume of quiet vengeance. Servants who had hidden in corners crept out at dawn, faces pale, shoes slipping on blood and spilled wine. Lucien sat slumped near the staircase, his body shaking, his mind half frozen with disbelief. Only hours ago, he had been serving wine, listening to music, imagining his future. Now, he sat among corpses. His hands were stained with crimson and his clothes smelled of poison. He could still hear the Duke's final word echoing in his mind, Ilara. The Duchess was gone. No one had seen her leave, yet her absence was louder than any scream. Some said she had fallen among the dead, others whispered she had walked out into the snow untouched, the cold bowing to her grief. Lucien, trembling, believed the latter. When the king's soldiers arrived by midday, the sight stopped them in their tracks. The captain, a stern man named Roulard, surveyed the carnage in silence. Not even war leaves a room like this, he muttered. Lucien was dragged to his feet, questioned under the cracked portraits of the Duke's ancestors. His answers stumbled, his voice barely more than breath. She did it, he whispered. The Duchess. She planned it. Roulard frowned. One woman poisoned an entire noble house. Lucien nodded, tears burning his eyes. You didn't see her? She wasn't afraid. The captain studied him a long moment, then turned toward the shattered table where the Duke's goblet still lay, half filled, its rim stained with gold dust. We'll see what truth remains, he said, signaling his men to search the estate. In the cellars, they found the casks, cracked open, their wax seals melted and warped. The bitter scent of almonds clung to the air. And behind the Duke's private study wall, hidden inside a drawer lined with velvet, they found letters, all written in the Duchess's hand. The last one was short, elegant, deliberate. When mercy becomes weakness, justice must be taken by hand. Within days, the tragedy spread across France like wildfire. Couriers carried the tale to every corner of the realm, though none told it the same way. Some claimed a foreign assassin had infiltrated the banquet, others whispered of sorcery, of curses sealed in wine. In the taverns, drunkards sang songs of a grieving wife who avenged her family. In the churches, priests called it divine punishment for a house that had grown too proud. Lucien became the story's unwilling heart. He was questioned for weeks, passed from one official to another. To them, he was a frightened servant. To history, he was the lone witness of the Villeroy fall. But each night when he closed his eyes, he saw her again, Duchess Ilara, walking calmly toward the great doors as snow swallowed her shape. He tried to convince himself that she was gone, that the storm had claimed her. Yet sometimes, late at night, he swore he could smell jasmine and almonds drifting through his window, faint, deliberate, almost tender. Months passed. The king ordered the estate sealed, its halls stripped of gold, its portraits burned. The Villeroy name was struck from record, erased like a curse from the nation's memory. But even as the ashes cooled, the whispers refused to die. Travelers began to speak of a woman seen in the northern provinces, cloaked, alone, her hands gloved even in warmth. Some said she carried a vial around her neck, others swore she never aged. Lucien never told the soldiers what else he had found that morning, the folded scrap of parchment beneath the Duke's goblet. Only 3 words, written in the Duchess's hand. For my sister. And as he sat by the window that night, the snow falling soft and endless beyond the palace ruins, Lucien finally understood the poison hadn't just ended a dynasty. It had settled a debt long overdue. The night of the banquet was wrapped in unease. From the grand hall's vaulted ceiling hung silver lanterns that cast trembling light over tables heavy with roasted quail, golden breads, and ruby-colored wine. The banners of House d'Artois shimmered in the candlelight, the proud crest of a lineage that had ruled these lands for 3 centuries. Yet beneath that radiance, there was something hollow. Conversations were forced, laughter brittle, and glances lingered too long. At the head of the table sat Lord Adrien d'Artois, his ringed fingers trembling slightly as he raised a goblet to toast the future of his family. To his right sat his wife, Genevieve, her beauty dimmed by exhaustion. Their sons and daughters filled the table, smiling as duty demanded, but even their eyes betrayed tension. A strange metallic scent lingered in the air, faint, but there. The wine smelled richer than usual, darker somehow. From the far end, the servants moved silently, trained to perfection. But one, a girl named Celine, hesitated near the decanters, her eyes darting between the goblets. She had been ordered to pour only from the right-hand vessel, the one sealed with the crimson ribbon. Yet as she filled Lord Adrian's cup, she caught a reflection, a faint iridescent shimmer swirling through the liquid. Her hand faltered. The butler's glare froze her where she stood. She obeyed. The music began, slow viols, a dirge disguised as celebration. Toasts followed. They drank. The first to cough was young Etienne, the heir. A moment later, his sister's laughter turned to gasps. Then, like falling dominoes, the sound of choking spread down the table. Chairs toppled. Glass shattered. Lord Adrian rose, clutching his throat, blood on his lips. Across from him, Genevieve's eyes were wide, not with fear but with understanding. Someone had poisoned the house from within. The once lavish banquet hall had turned into a chamber of screams. Plates clattered to the floor, silver forks skittered across the marble, and the music, still playing from the corner, became a cruel echo against the sounds of death. Celine stood frozen, her trembling hand still clutching the empty decanter. Around her, noble bodies convulsed, faces turning pale and blue as foam gathered at their lips. The torches flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows that made the whole scene feel like a painting of damnation. Lord Adrian staggered toward his wife, gasping her name, but Genevieve was already collapsing. Her ring slid from her hand, rolling across the table before stopping against an untouched cup, one meant for the absent guest of honor, Lord Adrian's brother, Lucien. Celine's instinct screamed to run, but before she could move, a hand gripped her shoulder. The butler, old Musso, pulled her toward the side of the hall, his voice trembling. "You didn't drink, did you?" he rasped. She shook her head, eyes wide. He looked toward the table, his face pale. "Then listen to me, girl. Get out. Now." But it was too late. Guards burst through the doors, their armor gleaming like cold moonlight. "What happened here?" one demanded, eyes darting across the carnage. Celine tried to speak, but her voice broke. Musso stepped forward, trembling. It was the wine. Someone switched the decanters. He turned toward the sideboard, where the twin vessels stood. One was empty. The other remained untouched, sealed with a blue ribbon, the real one. Celine's breath caught. The poisoned wine had been deliberately placed. In the chaos, a folded letter slipped from beneath Lord Adrian's sleeve. Musso picked it up with shaking hands, his eyes narrowing as he read the first line, "For debts paid in blood, the house of d'Artois shall fall." A chill ran through him. This was no accident. This was retribution, years in the making. Dawn broke over the d'Artois estate like an accusation. Smoke from the extinguished torches still clung to the air, mingling with the stench of spilled wine and death. The once magnificent hall was silent now, except for the crows gathering on the balcony railings, waiting for the shutters to open. The banners of House d'Artois, once symbols of pride, hung limp and stained. At the center of the hall, the physician and 2 guards worked in grim silence, counting bodies. 23 souls, every heir, every cousin, every guest. Only 2 had survived, Celine, the servant girl who had not drunk, and Mosso, the butler whose trembling hands refused to release the letter he'd found. The local magistrate, sent from Rouen, arrived before noon. His expression was not of sorrow, but of suspicion. Poisoned wine, he murmured, studying the decanter. Too precise. Too efficient. Whoever did this knew exactly how to kill an entire house without spilling a drop of blood. His gaze shifted to Mosso. And you, old man, you were the keeper of the cellar, were you not? Mosso's lips quivered. For 40 years, sir. I served 3 generations. The magistrate's tone sharpened. Then you knew their secrets too. He gestured toward the table where Lord Adrian's body lay, the letter beside him now sealed as evidence. This was vengeance. Someone knew what the d'Artois did before they were lords. Celine, still pale and shaking, whispered, they said the family's wealth came from the wars, but the maids used to talk of a debt unpaid. Something buried beneath the vineyard. Mosso closed his eyes, whispering as if to himself. Not buried, sealed. The magistrate turned to him sharply. Sealed? Mosso hesitated, his breath shallow. The old vault. Beneath the chapel. Lord Adrian once said that if the d'Artois blood ever mixed with treachery, the curse would rise again. Outside, thunder rumbled though the sky was clear. The entrance to the chapel vault was hidden beneath a cracked marble slab, half concealed by dust and forgotten prayers. When the guards pried it open, a gust of stale air rushed out, heavy, cold, and tinged with rot. The magistrate ordered torches lit, and their flickering light revealed a narrow stairway descending into darkness. Celine followed hesitantly, clutching a rosary she'd taken from the chapel altar. Behind her, Mosso limped, his face pale as bone. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing like distant footsteps. At the base of the stairs stood a heavy iron door, engraved with the crest of House d'Artois, a lion devouring a serpent. Beneath it, half erased by rust, were words in Latin, sanguis debet solvi in sanguine, blood must be paid in blood. The magistrate swallowed. Break it open. When the door finally gave way, the torchlight fell upon a chamber filled with chests, parchments, and bones, dozens of them, arranged as if in prayer. Among the relics were tattered banners bearing unfamiliar coats of arms. Mosso stepped forward, his voice trembling. These are not d'Artois ancestors, these are their enemies. Celine knelt beside a chest marked with soot and opened it. Inside lay ledgers written in a shaking hand, records of executions, unpaid debts, and names of families stripped of land and titles. The House of d'Artois had not risen through valor, but through betrayal and bloodshed. The magistrate's eyes darkened as he read. This was no noble lineage, it was a monument built on stolen lives. From the corner of the vault, a faint shimmer caught Celine's eye, a vial sealed with wax, still half full of a silvery substance. Mosso recognized it immediately. That's the poison, he whispered. The same that killed them. He turned to the magistrate, his voice hollow. It was kept here for a reason. They feared it, yet they kept it. As if they knew the debt would return. Above them, the chapel bells began to toll, though no one had touched the ropes. When the bells tolled that morning, the sound carried far beyond the d'Artois estate. Villagers paused their work in the fields, glancing toward the manor where black smoke still lingered above the rooftops. Rumors began to spread, whispers of poison, of divine punishment, of a family cursed for sins buried too deep to stay forgotten. The magistrate ordered the vault sealed once more. The ledgers, bones, and vial of poison were sent to Rouen for investigation, but none who had entered the chamber ever truly slept again. Celine, the servant girl who survived, was taken for questioning but later released. She left the estate without a word, vanishing into the countryside like a ghost. Mosso, too weak to travel, remained behind to oversee the burials. Within a week, he was found dead in his quarters, a half-written confession by his side. The letter told of his silence, how he had known of the poison's existence, of the debt of blood pact that the first Lord d'Artois had made generations ago. In exchange for wealth and land, he had betrayed his allies during a border war, condemning them to starvation and death. The pact was sealed with a drop of poison, a promise that if the family ever turned that same poison upon its own, the curse would devour them from within. Historians later debated whether the tale was myth or fact, but the estate itself became proof of something darker. No heir ever reclaimed it. The vineyards withered, the fountains dried, and the halls fell silent, as if time itself refused to enter. Centuries later, travelers still speak of the manor's ruins. On certain nights, when the wind cuts through the valley, they claim to hear the faint echo of a banquet, silver goblets clinking, muffled laughter, and a woman's last breath carried through the cold. And in the chapel above the sealed vault, the lion and serpent crest remains, carved deep into the stone, untouched by moss or decay. It is said that those who linger too long before it hear the same whisper that ended the d'Artois line, blood must be paid in blood. Centuries passed, yet the land around the d'Artois estate never healed. Nature seemed to remember what men had chosen to forget. The soil turned coarse and bitter, vines refused to grow where the vineyards once bloomed. Locals began calling the valley La Val du Cement, the Valley of the Oath. No map named it so, yet every villager knew where not to go once night fell. Travelers who ignored the warnings often returned changed, if they returned at all. Some spoke of hearing laughter echoing from the ruins, faint but unmistakable, as if an unseen feast still went on in the shadows. Others swore they saw figures seated at the long-rotted banquet table, raising invisible goblets under the pale light of the moon. None dared linger after hearing the toll of phantom bells from the chapel tower, which had long since crumbled to dust. But among scholars, the legend of the d'Artois became something else, a parable whispered in lectures and written in forbidden books. Historians said it was not merely a curse, but a mirror held to all who sought power through deceit. The poison was no longer seen as a substance, but as a symbol of greed, betrayal, and the inescapable return of guilt. Céline's name appeared only once more, many years later, in the records of a convent in Lorraine. A nun matching her description had joined under a vow of silence. Her final note in the convent ledger read simply, "Forgive those who poison without the cup." By the dawn of the modern age, only fragments of the manor remained, a single wall, a cracked fountain, and the chapel doors that still refused to rot. Yet those who dared to stand before the ruin swore they could still smell something faint in the air, a trace of wine, sweet and metallic. And so the story endured, not as history, but as a warning. Empires rise and fall, names fade into dust, but debts of blood, they wait. Because somewhere beneath the stone, the whisper endures still. Blood must be paid in blood.